You're standing in the middle of your childhood home. The hallway stretches longer than it ever did. The lights flicker, and from one of the rooms you hear a voice, familiar, yet impossibly distorted. Your feet are heavy, as though the floor is pulling you downward. You know you're dreaming, but that doesn't make it less real. In fact, it feels more real than waking life ever has. Suddenly the walls close in. Something terrible is coming. You run, but you never move. You scream, but no sound escapes. Then you wake up. Heart pounding, sheets soaked, a familiar dread rising like smoke from the edges of your mind. You tell yourself, it was just a nightmare. But what if it wasn't just anything? What if the nightmare wasn't a defect in your psyche but a message? Not from some external spirit world, but from a part of you that speaks in symbols and shadows. A deeper consciousness you've ignored for too long. What if the thing you're running from isn't trying to hurt you, but to awaken you? Carl Jung once said, "The dream is the small hidden door in the deepest and most intimate sanctum of the soul." But what happens when that door swings open with terror instead of tranquility? Why does your mind conjure fear instead of comfort? Monsters instead of peace? Why are the most emotionally charged dreams, the nightmares, the ones you try hardest to forget? And what if forgetting is the exact wrong thing to do? Could it be that your nightmares are not glitches but compasses, pointing toward something you've been running from in waking life? You've been trained to avoid fear, to medicate it, rationalize it, distract yourself from it. But what if fear, especially the kind born in dreams, is the soul's desperate attempt to make you listen? And if that's true, then a more terrifying question follows. What happens to a person who never listens to their nightmares? What if your deepest growth lies on the other side of your darkest dream? Now, dare to look beneath the surface. What hidden force is responsible for these haunting visions, and why is it calling your name? They begin to forget that pain can be a teacher. That fear in its rawest form is often the soul's alarm bell, not a threat, but a summons. According to Carl Jung, what you suppress does not disappear. It festers. He called it the shadow, the hidden, often dark side of the psyche that contains all the parts of ourselves we deny, repress, or disown. Not just rage or shame, but buried potentials, unlived lives, silenced instincts. And it is in dreams, especially nightmares, where this shadow most forcefully knocks at the door of consciousness. Imagine your psyche as a vast house. Most people live only in the brightly lit rooms, but nightmares drag you, screaming, into the basement, where truths you've refused to face are still breathing. They wear masks of monsters, but what they demand is recognition. And yet, the world has trained you to avoid them. Modern culture sells comfort as the highest good. Pain is pathologized, medicated, muted. You're taught that nightmares are malfunctions, random byproducts of stress or trauma. But Jung saw them differently. Not as errors, but encrypted communications from the soul's deepest vaults. Messages written in archetypal symbols, ancient patterns that echo across every civilization and myth. Nietzsche warned of what happens when we deny the dark. Beware that, when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster, for when you gaze long into the abyss also gazes into you. But Jung would argue, you must gaze into the abyss, not to be consumed by it, but to integrate it. Because without that integration, the darkness doesn't leave, it leaks into your relationships, your choices, your quiet moments. It becomes the unspoken reason you sabotage what you love or fear what you desire. And so we are left with this dilemma. In avoiding the terror of our dreams, we lose access to the map they offer. But what is this map pointing to? What happens when we continue ignoring it, not just individually, but as a culture? We must now follow this thread further, to see how the avoidance of inner truth doesn't just shape dreams, but silently warps waking reality. The nightmare does not end when you open your eyes. It simply changes its mask. A person spends their entire life evading the monster that shows up night after night in their dreams. They wake up, dismiss the images as random nonsense, or worse, fearful omens to be silenced with medication or distraction. They scroll through screens, fill their lives with noise, routine, and the illusion of stability. But the monster doesn't leave. It simply changes form. It becomes anxiety in the boardroom, rage in the car, numbness in the bedroom. The ignored nightmare leaks into waking life, wearing masks called stress, burnout, and vague existential despair. Carl Jung warned of this very danger when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." These dreams, especially the terrifying ones, are not interruptions of the psyche. They are the psyche. And when we exile these messages to the margins of our awareness, they begin to haunt us from the shadows. Not to destroy us, but to get our attention. Neurologically, the amygdala, our threat detection center, is activated during nightmares. This biological design is not a glitch. It's an evolutionary scream, a symbolic fire alarm. It means something is burning beneath the floorboards of our psyche. And if we won't put it out in the dream, it will burn through our waking lives instead. And culturally, the more our world rewards polished appearances and immediate gratification, the more taboo it becomes to admit that something inside feels broken, lost, or out of control. So we hide. We become split, publicly competent, but privately terrified. Nightmares, then, are the soul's rebellion against the false self we parade each day. This disconnection breeds a kind of quiet violence. Relationships break under the weight of unspoken fears. Creative potential withers from lack of inner dialogue. Addictions form, not from weakness, but from a desperate attempt to silence the screams from within. But what if these symptoms weren't flaws? What if they were encrypted messages, coded pain, waiting to be translated? There's a rebellion stirring. Not a loud one, but one that begins in the silence between breaths, in the terrifying honesty of looking inward instead of away. And that's where the real transformation begins. But just as the nightmare seemed inescapable, woven into every waking moment, a subtle shift began to stir within him. It didn't come as a lightning bolt or a dramatic outcry, but rather a quiet defiance. One morning, while staring into that mirror, expecting to see the monster once more, he didn't flinch. Instead, he looked deeper beyond the fear and asked a question he had never dared to voice. What if this thing isn't here to hurt me, but to be heard? That single thought fractured the pattern. It gave him the power to pause instead of react, to sit in silence when the fear surged, and to listen. Every tremor of dread, every pang of shame or anger that once ruled him, he now greeted with curiosity. The rebellion didn't look like a battle cry. It looked like breathing slowly in the midst of chaos. He started journaling at dawn, pouring dreams onto paper before they slipped away. He went for walks without a destination, letting the city's rhythm replace his mental noise. He even returned to an old song he once loved, one that reminded him who he was before the fear crept in. These small rituals, repeated day by day, built a sanctuary inside him. And slowly, the nightmare loosened its grip. Not because it disappeared, but because it was finally being acknowledged. Like a neglected child, it softened when seen. This was not the end, but it was the first real moment of freedom. As the birds soared overhead and twilight painted the city in golden hues, a strange quiet settled inside him. Not the silence of emptiness, but the calm of clarity. He no longer feared the shadows, for he had walked through them and emerged whole. Each step he took now echoed with meaning, each breath a gentle rebellion against the despair that once held him hostage. The nightmares still came, but they no longer ruled him. Instead, they served as reminders of what he had overcome, ghosts from a past that no longer defined him. He began to reconnect, not just with the world, but with himself. Simple joys returned, the aroma of morning coffee, the sound of birdsong, the feel of the sun on his face. He smiled more, even if only to himself. Where once he hid behind locked doors, he now opened them. Where once he dreaded the mirror, He now greeted it with quiet pride. And though the world around him remained imperfect, he no longer sought perfection. He sought presence. And in that presence he discovered something powerful. Not the absence of fear, but the courage to live despite it. Because sometimes healing doesn't come with a bang. It arrives in whispers, in the soft glow of dawn, in the resilience of breath, in the light that gently slips through the cracks. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was finally living.